The common wisdom is that if you want realism, you buy GHK or VFC, and if you want pure performance, you buy TM. That still applies to the AKs, right? Well, only sort of. Welcome to Explosive Enterprises, and thanks to Dynatech Industries, we finally got our hands on Tokyo Marui AKM, and analyzing it has been a very interesting experience because the differences between it and its VFC and GHK counterparts have proven more subtle and nuanced than the blanket principle would imply. For full disclosure, this rifle is provided for free by Dynatech in exchange for a review, but we are under no editorial limitations regarding the content of this review, and everything you're about to hear is our honest opinion. The AKM is a historically extremely important rifle, but we already covered its development in our review of the GHK counterpart, so we'll link that in the description, but for now, let's skip to the TM. So let's look at the externals. Right off the bat, I want to say I'm impressed, because if I didn't already know better, I would think that a lot of these parts are steel. It turns out that the only steel parts are the dust cover, trigger guard, sling swivel, cross pins, cleaning rod, and some minor parts in the front sight assembly. But all the parts with this nice brushed finish, the hint of oil slick rainbow, the satin that shines bronze on the edges in certain lights, that's all alloy. As we've noted in prior AK reviews, a real Russian AKM should be the consistent satin black of paint rather than have some parts look blued, but part of me wants to pretend this is a blued Polish rifle rather than have to admit that the most convincing alloy as blued steel finish I've ever seen on an airsoft gun is on a gun that shouldn't be blued at all. Well, let's go piece by piece. The muzzle is the standard AKM slant brake over standard 14mm counterclockwise threading, held in place by a spring-loaded pin on the front sight base, which is pinned in place. Normally on an AK, windage adjustment is done by drifting this cross peg to either side, but not on the TM. Instead, the front sight post is actually slightly offset from center, so that threading it in and out either with pliers or the included tool adjusts both windage and elevation at the same time. There are some real firearms that work this way, such as the venerable Uzi, but this is not how the real AK is designed. The exact offset is a bit hard to measure, but it looks to be about 0.7mm from centerline, which with a sight radius of 380mm produces a maximum deviation angle of 0.106 degrees, which translates to a windage adjustment of 4.5 inches to either side at a distance of 200 feet, or 11.5 centimeters at 61 meters, or 13.5 barleycorns at 86 arshins. That's not a lot, so realistically, if the windage is off by any significant amount, the solution will be to realign the front sight post by loosening the screw on the underside, which permits a few millimeters of play. On the AK design, the rear sight and front sight are both attached to the barrel, so this should be more than sufficient to correct for any imprecision in assembly. Anyways, the barrel has a line texture characteristic of at least some real AKMs, while the gas block and gas tube are that smooth, I can't believe it's not steel look. Then we get to the handguards, and surprise number 2, these are plastic. It's not quite as convincing as the metal, but you do have to be within arm's length to notice. An interesting element is that because the pattern is applied over a lighter underlying plastic, wear and damage end up looking a lot like penetrating the shellac does on real furniture. Moving back, the rear sight is as you'd expect and has negligible horizontal play. Once again, the Cyrillic P is postianaya, or consistent, permanent, and this is your standard battlefield zero of about 300 meters. It matters on the airsoft AK because the rear sight sits a little higher in this position than at the 100 meter mark, so if you adjust the front sight accordingly, then that makes it just a little higher and consequently a little easier to acquire a sight picture. Unless you're going for African militia vibes, then you gotta dial it up to maximum power. Anyways, the barrel pin has a slightly different finish, and you could be forgiven for trying to punch it out from one side, but would then have to be a double moron to then try punching it out from the other before realizing it's not necessary to remove it at all to disassemble the gun. The other cross pins on the receiver have the same finish, though note that the rivets are all fake and just part of the receiver casting. I mentioned before the top cover is steel, and real ones will fit, though this looks fine, so there isn't much point. The pistol grip is a nicely modeled faux bakelite finish with the same 332 grip code as the Saiga. This is an Ijevsk code, which corresponds to the Izhmash logo and a straightforward 1975 year marking on the receiver. The serial number is in the correct format for a 1975 Izhmash, though is not unique to each gun, and we find the requisite set of proof markings around the barrel pin. As mentioned, the trigger guard is steel and held to the receiver by 4 screws, of course not really visible in use. On the right side, the bolt carrier is the nice but inauthentic faux bluing, while the selector is the less appealing but more correct satin paint. And at the back, we find the giveaway Tokyo Marui markings, kind of lame, but at least relatively subtle. Lastly, the stock is again plastic, but all the sling swivel components are steel, so it can at least safely be used with the sling. The magazine is a big chunk of alloy weighing in at about 520 grams, which, believe it or not, is still significantly lighter than a real loaded steel 7.62 mag. There's no steel on here, just satin black for the body and faux steel for the base plate, but visually it's a pretty decent replica. Overall, the TM AKM looks a lot better than its materials would imply on paper, and despite being a plastic and pot metal replica of a wood and steel firearm, I find this surprisingly convincing. The feel is pretty good too, at just under 8 pounds or 3.5 kilos loaded. While that is about 1.5 pounds less than the real thing, it's close enough enough and, more importantly, balanced similarly enough to sell it. Before we get into internals, I want to mention again that this video is sponsored by Dynatech Industries, a GBB-centric retailer. They carry gas blowback pistols and rifles, magazines, BBs and gas, and they're actively working with the distributors to get more cool stuff imported into the US. If you've seen our channel, you know we don't do a lot of sponsorship deals, and we have turned several down over the years, but we do genuinely feel that Dynatech is aligned to our mission of making this hobby better for everyone. If you like gas guns, if you like our content, please check them out. Okay, so let's take it apart. Field stripping is normal for an AK, and unlike the GHK or VFC AKs, the bulk carrier can be simply removed without having to fuss with the buffer or nozzle. The cleaning rod turns out to be just a stub, the gas tube comes off as expected, and when I remove the lower handguard, we see that it has a very stiff spring to take up any slack and eliminate play, which is a nice touch. Now, accessing the hop requires removing the front end. Before I do that, I should mention that when this gun arrived, there was a slight misalignment of the barrel to the receiver, which appears to be due to a very slight bend at the front of the receiver. We suspect this was due to damage during shipping, as we've seen on some Tokyo Marui Saigas imported to the US. I bring this up now because the barrel is secured by 2 big screws in the front trunnion, and by shimming with a little bit of tape, it was very easy to correct this misalignment without the fuss that would be involved in correcting the same issue on a GHK or VFC. The hop unit now pulls out the back, eating the dry fire switch spring into another zip code, but after sliding an O-ring off the front, I can take off the adjustment wheel, then the 2 small screws that hold the clamshell together. This is pretty straightforward. We have a vertically sliding contact patch that gets pulled down by the adjustment wheel, a brass inner barrel the length of just 200mm, but an O-ring to stabilize it in the outer barrel, and the hop unit has a cutout on the right side for an indexing tab on the bucking. The stock bucking was not capable of adequately hopping above 0.28 grams, so it has been replaced with this Unicorn 60 durometer precision bucking. While this fixed 2-prong contact patch is a bit of a limitation, it works well enough and will show the performance later. Overall, this is a simple hop unit that does what it needs to do and is easy to adjust and to swap buckings. Just make sure to get the alignment on the barrel perfect before reinstallation. On the barrel assembly itself, if I wanted to remove the outer barrel, I would now drive out the actual barrel pin right to left, remove this chamber insert via its screw, and loosen a securing grub screw on the underside. That permits the barrel to slide out the back of the rear sight base, which means having to remove all the individual components of the barrel, and we don't think it's necessary to show that, as it's tedious but straightforward. The bulk carrier is 320 grams, which is about the same as the newer V3 GHKs, but a bit less than the VFC. To remove the nozzle, we have to first remove a big screw on the front, then another on the back, and that separates the carrier into 2 sections. So above the nozzle stop retains a nozzle return spring, which has a plug to prevent binding and rides in a groove on the nozzle. Interestingly, the top of the nozzle has a roller to reduce friction against the body of the carrier, and while the nozzle is not ported at the rear, the O-ring is a good fit for the carrier, which means it does not rely on pressure to seal, and that helps it work at lower temperature. This is actually a really simple nozzle design because, well, check this out. I just pull off the rear O-ring, then take out 1 screw, and part of the nozzle slides out the back, also serving as the rocket valve retention. The downside is that this rocket valve and nozzle design cannot easily be made adjustable. The upside is that it's simple and easy to access, just 3 screws and no pins, so swapping in high or low power valves as necessary is definitely doable, and the valve itself is a chunky design suitable to 3D printing. The recoil system is patterned off the real thing as far as the recoil springing guide itself, but it also incorporates a recoil buffer of a different type to the Saiga. Here we have just a giant pad using a stack of thick O-rings rather than a spring. This doesn't impart quite as much energy for the return stroke, but does an unsurprisingly excellent job of soaking up impact to minimize wear and tear. Now the fire control group, which is not quite the same as, but very similar to the one in the Saiga. With the hammer down, I can rotate the selector up and pull it out the side, then knock out the 2 cross pins, and the whole fire control group lifts out the top. It's roughly patterned off the real AK fire control, and it has the typical Marui style valve knocker lock and auto sear, but there are some interesting things going on here. For instance, the hammer does not actually catch on the trigger. Instead, the hammer and trigger both operate on a third piece, an intermediate sear, which allows for more contact with either part and greatly reduces the dragging that tends to erode pot metal. One quirk of the AK is that it cannot be charged while set to safe, and here that is accomplished by having a small piece that blocks the strut of the hammer spring guide when the gun is set to safe. You probably also noticed that rather than braided wire springs as on a real AK, the hammer uses an H&K or FN style strut and compression spring. Having said all that, the fire selection does work like the real deal. On semi, the hammer is grabbed by a disconnector at the back, and on auto, the disconnector is held down by the selector so that the auto sear alone controls the hammer. So So while this does not look exactly like its real counterpart on the inside, it does function as you would expect, and it does so while minimizing wear and tear to its mostly pot metal internals. There's nothing to change here, nothing that needs adjusting or preventative maintenance, and if something should go wrong, it's a cinch to extract the trigger pack and replace parts as needed. Time to switch to the magazine. The top and bottom assemblies are separately attached to the magazine body, so let's start with the bottom. 2 screws secure the base plate, which retains the magazine spring and guide, though the follower will normally stay in the mag unless pushed out because it has a spring-loaded hook for the stop on empty mechanism, which imparts some drag. This magazine holds 35 BBs, and while you can get a few more by cutting down the guide, that may weaken the spring over time, so we don't recommend it. The fill valve is a nested design with the actual valve itself in the middle. Note the very long fill tube, which limits capacity. By default, the outer section has another longer limiter tube, extending most of the length of the mag. So out of the box, this valve would spit back gas at about 13 to 14 grams of propane, and we had to fill in short bursts or it wouldn't even make it to 10 grams. But by cutting down the limiter tube, we get a simple and consistent 32 gram fill. While we're here, note that the bottom of the mag is cast into the body, so the O-rings on the inlet valve and the limiter tube are the only seals here. Now for the top of the mag, this requires driving out 2 large cross pins in either direction, and 1 small one from left to right, and now we can examine how the stop on empty works. When the follower comes up, it pushes on this lever, which forces a bar to rise that cams the valve knocker and the gun up so it misses the valve. If I pry open the left side cover panel, you can see that as it rises, it locks in place until this release is tripped so that the stop on empty will stay engaged even when the follower gets pushed back down by the nozzle. Often this style of stop on empty requires you to manually reset it after reloading BBs, but here the reset button actually gets automatically tripped as the mag is inserted into the gun, so there's no need to worry about it, it self-resets. And if you want to dry fire, there's a spring-loaded tab on the side of the hop unit that can be pulled back and up to lock it in place, which then pushes down on this tab on the side of the magazine, and that keeps the stop on empty from working. This is all fantastically designed. It's complicated but reliable and requires no oversight from the user. And lastly, the valve is a standard TM, so not much to talk about here. Just be aware that if you do take any of the top section apart, it takes a bit of force to compress the main sealing O-ring and get it aligned with the body. We suggest you get the rear pin in halfway, then the front pin from the other side, then finish the rear pin, and then the front. As for loading the mag, it takes a bit of force, and we highly recommend Comrade Quiche speed loader adapters to make it easier. Even with that, it's tough to hit the full 35, and the EMG Autobot often stalls out before finishing. This can be solved by carefully drilling out the front of the feed lips with a 6mm drill bit, and this can be done while the base plate is removed without having to actually remove the top portion of the mag. Be careful, go slow, turning the bit by hand will work fine if it's sharp, and don't remove material from the back of the feed track. If done properly, this makes it far easier to load mags with no apparent drawbacks, as the tension from the feed spring pins the top BB against the feed lip, so it still takes some force to push it out the front. So while the mag needs a little bit of tinkering to reach its full potential, overall I think this might just be the best designed GBB we've reviewed on this channel. It's easy to work on and designed around the limitations of its materials to maximize both performance and longevity without risking stuff breaking. Some areas are a little complicated, like the stop on empty mechanism in the magazine, but not in a way that threatens to stop functioning. I think it's pretty telling that of the 3 modifications we recommend, 2 of them, bucking replacement and inlet valve shortening, are just the results of us using heavier BBs and different propellant gases from the intended Japanese market, while the third, which is the feed lip widening, is purely optional and for convenience. We'll have a lot to talk about when we get to aftermarket, but make no mistake, it's all for customizing for user preference rather than upgrades or fixes. Controls and operation follow the normal AK pattern. Magazine insertion is the usual rock and lock, and the safety must be set to auto or semi to charge it. The trigger having that extra sear gives it a feel atypical for an AK, with a short initial take-up of just over a pound before a second stage goes a bit further and then breaks at just shy of 2 pounds. In practice, this is so light that I don't even notice when pulling normally. It has some over travel, but resets just ahead of the breakpoint, so it is very easy to spam. When the mag is empty, it goes click just as on a real AK. And as mentioned, the stop on empty mechanism is self-resetting, so there's no risk of a full mag going click as well. Lastly, hop adjustment is done with a wheel on the inside of the magazine well. The wheel's tucked up in there, and the numbers on it are hard to see, so realistically adjustment is an operation that has to be done with bare hands and by feel. Now let's shoot it. This feels familiar because it's about the same bolt weight and spring tension as the TM Saiga, which doesn't come as a surprise. It's not as violent as the VFC or as snappy as the newer GHKs, but it doesn't have any of the sponginess of the MWS, so it's a crisp and noticeable, albeit slightly sluggish impulse. For efficiency, we'll use a complete 32 gram fill, and in continuous semi-auto, we see about 280 shots before it stops cycling far enough to feed and then gasses out shortly after.
Just shy of 290.
With full auto, at first there's a little bit of siphoning with this complete fill, but with a few minutes to warm up between mags, it still chugs through 5 mags and then gasses out on the 6th. And with the magazine chilled to freezing, it has no problem chewing through a mag in rapid fire, then reloading BBs and doing it again, and then reloading BBs and doing it a third time. I could keep going, but the longer it has to pull heat from the air, the less representative it becomes of actual cold weather performance. So overall, this is great performance as expected for a TM, and it's actually quite efficient at about 9 shots per gram of gas, which is on par with the newer GHKs and almost as good as the VFCs. It delivers consistent and reliable performance in all weather. The combination of valve knocker lock good seals, single body mag design for thermal transfer, and soft recoil spring make it insensitive to temperature and enable it to fully cycle right until it runs out of gas. We do feel it benefits a lot from the gas capacity increase mod and I highly recommend it, though you could consider leaving about an inch or so of the tube protruding past the inlet valve if you intend to use a lot of full auto and want to avoid the risk of siphoning. On the chrono, with 0.32 gram BBs and on propane at room temp, it starts at around 1.25 joules, diminishing to 1.12 joules by the end. That's remarkably little drop over the course of a mag, and note that when chilled to freezing, it was still able to do just under a joule. Hop performance will depend on the bucking used, because as mentioned earlier, this is not the stock setup, but we are pretty happy with this unicorn bucking, and honestly I find the sights more of an impediment than the hop. Which brings us to practicality, and it says a lot that my biggest gripe with this gun is that I just don't get along with AK irons. Oh, they're fine for target shooting or at a distance, but the notch sight design doesn't lend itself to quick acquisition the way Ghost Ring does, and I sometimes find myself resorting to point shooting, which is sloppy, embarrassing AEG behavior and warrants 10 Hail Maruis as penance. In any case, other than that, this gun is a remarkably usable example of a bog standard AKM. It's a manageable length with manageable balance and decent magazine capacity for a GBBR. The mags themselves are easy to fill and recover from cooldown quickly. They fit in AK compatible pouches without any trouble, there's no risk of the valve getting accidentally depressed. And the way the mags click into the gun is exquisite. Seriously, compared to the finicky hooking motion needed to seat Saiga mags, this is night and day, even a little easier than the VFC or GHK AKs. Get the mag into the mag well at a slight angle and just rotate, and it clicks right into place. There's no wobble or play once it's in the gun either. Really don't have anything negative to say about the handling, maybe that it's a little easy to bump the selector, and even that is fixable by bending the selector tab to apply more tension. Otherwise, in typical Marui fashion, the gun just works. So where Aftermarket is concerned, this is really all about customizing to user preference, but be aware the compatibility is limited. A real pistol grip is drop-in, but real furniture otherwise requires extensive DIY work to fit, and AEG spec gas tubes like the LCT Ultimac don't permit the piston to travel freely. There's a lot of aftermarket specifically for the TM though, plus a number of wood furniture kits, and even steel receiver and barrel sets. For now, I'll just say that while wood is a maybe, we recommend against the body kits, and we'll explain more when we get to conclusions and pricing. In any case, one of the common recommendations for use with propane is a 115% strength recoil spring, both for better feel and a buffer against possible rear trunnion damage in warm weather. This one is a BavTac 115% spring, and it makes for a subtle increase in cyclic rate at the cost of a very minor reduction in gas efficiency. Beyond that, while there are various steel internals available, we feel confident in saying this gun doesn't need them. It's designed around pot metal, and it works fine with pot metal. Go with whatever external parts you need to make it look and handle how you like, but leave the internals alone. And so already we come to conclusions. This is almost entirely pot metal and plastic replica that manages to be the best looking pot metal and plastic replica I've ever seen. It's just a shame that it's ultimately an inauthentic finish for the metal, and the plastic isn't quite good enough to fool anyone under close inspection. But it more than makes up for it with the internal design, which is excellent and easy to work on, and designed around its materials such that there is no serious concern of parts wearing or breaking. It does need a little tweaking to reach its full potential, benefiting from a bucking swap and some minor magazine alteration, but even without those changes, it's efficient, reliable, works in cold weather, and still delivers a surprisingly good shooting experience, if not quite as energetic as its VFC or GHK counterparts. For pricing, our sponsor Dynatech has them listed at $600 USD, compared to $630 for the VFC AK, and for what it's worth, both of these are actually less than Hong Kong or Taiwan prices after factoring in shipping, even with the tariffs theoretically now gone. Don't worry, nobody's getting refunds. But yeah, so it's just a tiny bit cheaper than the VFC, and this is where it comes down to what you're after. While you can, in theory, buy a TM AKM and then real woodcut and steel parts, that's a lot of money, and by swapping the body, you run the risk of inducing quality control or tolerancing issues, which have proven to be an issue with those kits. And if you are willing to deal with that level of tinkering and associated risk, the VFC AKs offer comparably great performance, plus full steel out of the box, and they have an AKM of their own on the way. GHK also seems to have gotten their act together with the V3 AK105, though we still need to see a production sample, which again is pretty comparably priced. As with many Marui designs, the best thing the TM AKM has going for it is reliability, both in terms of working cleanly with minimal maintenance or tinkering, and solid performance under all weather conditions. Sacrificing that reliability to chase realism just feels like a waste. If you're going to buy a Marui, we feel it's better to play to the Marui's strengths. For that reason, we recommend the Marui to players who will mostly leave it alone, people who want something that works 100% of the time more than they want something full steel. Start with either the AKM or the more tactical AKX. Make the minor changes we suggested. At most, add wood furniture or railed gas tube to the AKM, or whatever furniture you prefer for the AKX, and then leave it alone. As long as it doesn't bother you that you can't use real furniture or that this gorgeous finish is actually pot metal, we think you'll really enjoy this gun. But that's not me, so I'll be sticking with my VFC, but I appreciate the Tokyo Marui AKM for what it is, and I suspect at least one of my teammates is going to be picking one of these up after seeing what it can do. As always, draw your own conclusions and decide what matters to you. That's all for today. If you like what we do, consider checking out our Patreon linked in the description. And as always, thanks for watching.
Pad on left side, pad on left side!
I got you in the chest. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You're good.
Wrist back.